Well, good morning, everybody. And let's talk about first the forecast that verified for June 23rd through 27th. There's some interesting things to talk about with that. As you can see, we did not get a forecast in for our team, but through the magic of Zoom and sharing, I can show you down here in the lower right-hand corner that we were thinking about 48 plus or minus 6, and Joe just never got to. I have Joe issue the forecast. He'll usually get on Tuesday morning and enter it, and he couldn't do it that week, and I was busy preparing for my daughter's wedding. So we didn't get the forecast in like I wanted, but we were thinking in terms of about 49, 48, which was near the 10 and 30 year normal. One of the interesting things in looking at this forecast from a post-mortem spectrum is I'll bring us to these CPC analogs and the temperature projection for about 3 weeks out. If you look at the temperature projection for about 3 weeks out, looking for heat in the Northwest and Rocky Mountain region and cool in the Eastern region. And of course, cool in the Eastern region where you got a lot of population, and then warmer out west. And of course, we have a lot of population out west as well. And so you've got these two extremes. You've got warmth in the west, cool in the east. And of course, that kind of led us to thinking that, well, things were going to be close to the climatological mean. If you ever try to work out some sort of verification score, which we did in in our Rankin et al. Paper from 2017, you discover that climatology is tough to beat. It really is tough to beat. And even in a situation like this, where we were expected to see fairly strong heat in the West and cool in the East, you've got these two extremes, which are basically statistically pretty much going to cancel each other out. And it's remarkable how close this came to being the forecast. Obviously, we know the heat is a little further to the west than shown here. Let me get the I wanted to get the 500 millibar map from that day. Let me get back to that drive, because it's remarkable how well the CPC analogs did, especially when you pick out, and the way that these CPC analogs are constructed, we pick out the 10 days that correlate the best and then project those out 3 and 4 weeks. Let's see, where's my 500? There's 500 millibars. See the strong positive height anomaly a little further east than it actually turned out to be, but still not a bad forecast when you're considering the time period and the fact that this is very large scale. If you look at the 500 millibar flow right now and what's going on, you do see this fairly strong ridging event that has been around for about 5-6 days now. So I think that would qualify as a blocking event, probably a moderate blocking event, but you've got a little bit of a blocking event here in the Atlantic as well. And of course, that means the flow all through the North America, Pacific, and Atlantic sector is going to be a little bit sluggish. And that's probably why we're experiencing this strong heat. That's obviously why we're getting the strong heat that's being driven by this blocking event. Usually these things, usually these things set up more out over the eastern Pacific and maybe even into the Alaska sector. If you look at the 5 days previous to this and go back to last week, there was a little bit of a blocking up in the Alaska sector. And again, generally when that happens, you can expect cooler than normal temperatures in the southeast, which again, we've been experiencing. I remember in the last few weeks when we've been talking about the forecast, folks have been remarking about the above normal forecasts that we think are going to happen for summer for most of the nation, but below normal in the southeast and near Texas. And so for the most part, these things are working out. But again, as we look at the previous forecast, most people were in that, were near the climatological mean and did pretty well with the forecast. And had we entered a forecast, we would have been 48 plus or minus 6. So most people did, again, fairly well. There wasn't a lot in the June 5th through 7th period to persuade us to not stay close to the climatological normal. One of the other things that we like to look at, and let me bring it up here, is where we are relative to El Nino. Again, you don't expect El Nino to be a strong factor in the summertime, but what we do kind of look at is the strength of those SST anomalies and the transition that we're experiencing. And as you can see, the West Pacific, the East Pacific is still very weak La Nina, probably what we would call a cool neutral. And if you go to some of the El Nino products, this particular one from Columbia University, you can see that temperatures right now in the Pacific are running slightly below normal, but still what we would call ENSO neutral, cool ENSO neutral. And it looks like the models and the dynamic models and the statistical models are going to keep us in weak La Nina conditions for this winter. And if it does that, this will be the first year since 98, 99 that you had this back-to-back La Nina period. And one of the things that we do when we make our forecast is we look to those years as possible analogs. And so when we look at, again, the June 7th forecast and then the forecast that we entered this morning, we looked at the 99-2000 period. We looked at La Nina 2007, which would be 2008 now. La Nina 2010, which would be 2011 now, and then La Nina 2017, which is 2018 now. And if you look at the cooling degree statistics from those time periods as possible analogs, or they again point to a relatively normal distribution. 3 of those periods are close to normal. 1 was below, 1 is above. And so there's not a lot to knock us off the idea that things are going to stay fairly close to the climatological mean, or whether it was the June 7th forecast or this upcoming forecast. as you'll see, we do forecast, let's see, I think Joe's already entered it. So I'm going to go to this forecast. Again, it's been so remarkably things have been so remarkably steady, if you will, that again, we're sticking with that climatological normal 59 plus or minus 7. The 30-year average is 59, the 10-year is 62. So maybe a little cooler this time, but we've been right around those normals. What we're looking at for this forecast, of course, is if you look at the CPC analogs for the time period covered in our the games forecast period, you can see that the 3-week forecast is for heat across the northern part of the United States, especially in the Great Lakes and Central Plains, but this continued cool pattern for the South and Texas region, where you've, of course, got a lot of population as well. And so, again, this pattern seems to be in place for the winter, for the summer, and there's not a lot to dissuade us to throw out an extremely warm earth, cool forecast. Here's what the 500 millibar projection looks like. Again, I wonder if this is projecting for more blocking in the eastern Pacific area, but you've got a little bit of a ridge in the east as well. And if we look at some of our, where is the blocking? Right here. If you look at what blocking has been doing across the globe, and at about the time we made our last forecast, the June 7th forecast for this period, most of the blocking was on the other side of the world. And our side of the world was fairly free of that. And then, of course, by the time we get to this period, you can see that blocking has emerged in the eastern Pacific and has been fairly strong off the coast. And so that is what's definitely driving our heat. And if this pattern continues for the next 3 weeks, then it's quite likely that again, we'll see this northern warmth, southern cool type pattern continue. The models. Oh, that's the southern hemisphere. I'm not sure why. Where am I? Northern hemisphere.
Again, if I haven't heard anything about my
Joe, you're on here. Just a second, Joe. I'll let you talk about some of the model stuff. All right. So again, the model projections continue this ridging, blocking off the coast of the off the west coast of North America, and then by day 5 and 6, that blocking subsides out of there. Blocking is notoriously difficult to forecast past day 5 and 6 anyway, so I'm not sure what to make of the rest of this forecast. But if we do continue this period of getting blocking in this region, well, then the pattern that you see forecast for our next forecast period may well verify. So, Joe, I didn't see that you hopped on. Do you have anything to add?
Doc, the main thing that the persistence plays out, and it's just a matter of how strong the blocking will be over the east, I feel.
Do you want to say anything about the models? I mean, I showed him the fact that we were talking about 48 plus or minus 6 for this forecast that we didn't enter.
Don't remind me, Doc.
But no, it's not on you. I'm just saying that we both forgot to enter it. But I wanted to show him that we did indeed make a forecast, even if we didn't get it in. MJO, I remember that we do rely somewhat on the MJO. And we look in this sector here, 5, 6, 7. You're going to look in that sector for cooler anomalies for the USA at that during this period. But this is a period where you can also enhance the storm track in the Pacific, and as a result, it's possible that you get more blocking during this part of the MJO as well. Well,
Did
the
you
MJO
hey Doc, did you show them the BOM MJO link that I sent you?
You sent me a link for the BOM one? No, I don't have that.
Yeah, it's with the other links I sent you this morning from my VA email.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't see those. Did you send those by email?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, the MJO is, again, it's in the Western Hemisphere and Africa, and it's projected to move more into the Indian Ocean, that MJO wave into the Indian Ocean during this next forecast period.
Hey, Dr. Lupo, would it be an okay time for a couple questions?
Yes, absolutely.
Let's see. I have a question or two, but before I jump in, does anyone else have anything that they want to share or just question, comment? Okay, I can jump in if anyone else has a question. Just jump in after. So I guess sort of question comment. You mentioned earlier about beating. It's difficult to beat climatology, especially when you get out to these kind of medium range periods. Weeks like 16 to 20 and beyond. That makes a lot of sense to me, especially like if you consider like a moving climatology, like like a 10-year in the summer or something like that. We've certainly found that in the forecast contest. I think the 10 years done well. And then you were talking about the patterns, and I think it's interesting the patterns that have set up so far this summer in June. Can you how much, and I guess where I'm going with this is, I feel, and some of this is feel, right? So just open for debate. I don't have hard facts. But it feels to me certainly like the summers in the United States have generally continued to get hotter and hotter, and forecasting something along the 5 or 10 year average has been a pretty good bet, and a more reliable skill metric, just from a continental United States standpoint. Where I feel like it gets more difficult is picking up the patterns. So like I look at this year, and if I'm honest with myself, like I don't know that and we'll see what July and August have in store, but you know, for example, I was hearing some groups talk about a little bit of La Nina, not necessarily you at all, but you know, hey, a little bit of a La Nina feel this summer. And my recollection of a little bit of La Nina summer would be more ridging and heat across the south and less across the north or northwest. And of course, what we know what's happened so far is, you know, more heat north and west and less heat south and east and things like that. And then I was also thinking about some of the things you were talking about with you know, certain patterns setting up and how, you know, difficult my experience has been, especially in the summer, to pick up on blocking or patterns like that, with maybe the exception of sometimes maybe persistence patterns and stuff. Like, in other words, there's some persistence that if something locks in June, maybe some persistence into July if it's there. Not necessarily a block in the high latitude sense, but just you know, an anomalous ridging pattern, whether it be on the southeast United States, northwest United States, whatever. So, okay, where's my question here? I guess, do you have, especially thinking about folks who maybe are new to this, um, when you think, you know, if I know CPC sometimes has some stuff on their site in terms of, you know, historical relationships between ENSO patterns and temperatures in the United States. When you think about things like that, are there telltale signs, like say it was a month ago, coming into this, you know, we were back in early May. Are there things out there, especially for new forecasters and stuff, that they could have latched on to say, yeah, okay, you know, based on the current ENSO pattern or based on other signals, I don't know. I've heard some groups talk about the North Pacific SST pattern and how hot it is and this and that. Are there things that you think would have telegraphed well, or at least with some value add, the pattern that we've seen thus far across the continental United States?
Well, to answer that question, I think we have done we've done this kind of analysis for our part of the country, the Missouri and central United States, and we were able to create a database of, okay, in La Nina years, you tend to expect a tilt toward warmer temperatures, and during El Nino temperatures, again, the distribution of those temperatures is still going to be quite normal, but it may skew one way or another toward warmer than normal conditions or cooler than normal conditions during El Nino. And based on that, that's not going to be perfect, of course, but it's going to be associated with certain 500 millibar signals. For example, we're doing a study right now on drought for this area. And if you look at extreme droughts, you get a positive 500 millibar anomaly, which is what you'd expect over the central United States. But if you have moderate drought, the 500 millibar height anomaly is more in the western United States, and there's a trough in the eastern, or a negative anomaly in the eastern United States, which again for moderate drought would put us on the upstream side of the ridge, where if you look at the old ideas from Bjerknes, Holmboe, and those things, that you'd expect to be in a subsidence region as well. And so we're able to relate some of these temperature patterns out here to 500 millibar anomalies. And if you think about those, you can kind of impute what the eastern United States might be, or the western US might be, although it would be interesting to do the same kind of statistical analysis on temperatures in other parts of the US like we've done here. So I guess that's a long answer, but that's kind of the thinking we do with temperatures out here.
That's helpful. And I mean, it sounds like, I mean, part of that sounds like too, that there's, you know, for someone who doesn't have more, you know, complicated or sophisticated methods, I mean, is there anything, and maybe the answer is no, but just like, is there anything that you think like telegraphs this pattern a month in advance, like any standard sort of ENSO composite or analog
Oh,
methods, or do you think that's it's just there, you know, that's just too simple and there's just nothing, not enough there?
I would say that the it's hard to say whether that would be a yes or no on that, because again, we've been able to use the the cooling degree days versus La Nina summers, like what we're experiencing now, with some success in pointing us toward cooler than normal, warmer than normal, or sticking with Climo. And so while it's a very it's simple, it's it is useful in pointing you toward a certain direction.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Lupo at the moment? Otherwise we can
I have a question. I'm not sure if anyone's looked into this, but I was reading online that we're heading into a negative PDO and negative AMO state, which really, from what I'm reading, it seems to be exacerbating the conditions out in the West.
Yes, yeah, we if I remember correctly, we the West experienced some of these strong heat waves during the last time we were in a negative PDO period, and that would have been 2015, 2013, and even back into the late 70s. I remember some strong heat waves out there, but those heat waves were more in July and August. This kind of heat is not only strong, but it's a little early for them too. So yeah, there's probably something to that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. I don't know where Joe went. But he gave me some links, so I'll explore some of those. Let's see. One of the other things we look at, which is kind of related to ENSO, is the SOI index. The SOI index, when the SOI index changes abruptly, you'll see a signal on our weather maybe 10 days down the road or 20 days down the road. So that also tends to be a indicator for us that something's going to happen over the central United States in terms of more anomalous weather. And right now, there hasn't been very strong changes in the SOI index as you might expect right now with the state that La Nina is in. So. And then I don't look at the models all that much, the Euros and the Maxar models. If anybody wants to talk about those, I'd be glad to yield the floor. Joe usually handles that for us, but I usually take a look at observations. So.
Sure, I can mention it. And just quick housekeeping note. It looks like there was a little bit of a bug today. I'm not sure exactly why, but you'll notice that some of the inputs were duplicated. So like you see two CFSs and two of some other things. So
Oh, yeah.
so I didn't have time to fix it yet, but I did notice it and just wanted to let everyone know. But I did check the data, and the data is right. It's just that in some cases there's two of them. Okay. So yeah, so you were asking about the some of the model inputs here. So let's see, what was I gonna mention relevant to this too? Well, first of all, just yeah, so that I guess the benchmarks here, the 30 and 10-year normal, you can see up top there. Oh, I know what I was going to mention real quick, and I know Joe's not on the line, but Dr. Lupo, maybe you could pass this on to him. The Maxar normals now that you see up top, they should update they should update for the following week by Friday. So in other words, like this Friday, you should see the inputs available on the site for the upcoming forecast contest. So I know Joe asked about that, so if you could just pass that on. But let's see. So for this, this is now we're looking for the current forecast, right? Yeah. So today is 6/29. So looking out mid-July. So the 30-year normal is about 58. The 10-year normal is about 62. You can see that up top. Looking at the model inputs, the EC is a little bit above the 10-year there. It looks like it's 63, almost and a half, and the CFS is at 59. One thing I'll mention about the CFS. I was looking at this earlier, Dr. Lupo, and I know we've been talking about this for a couple weeks on the contest, but the CFS continues to have. We were all, and Dr. Decker's on the line here, we were all raving about the performance this winter where the CFS was like neck and neck, and I think finished in our contest slightly better than the ECMWF, which was, pretty big accomplishment for the CFS, but not the case so far this summer. Obviously, it's a relatively small subset of events that we have verified, I think maybe like 6, but in those 6 events, the CFS from a CRPS standpoint is not performing well. And from a bias standpoint, unfortunately, it's kind of doing the things it's done in some of the past years. You may argue it's a good thing because maybe it's reliably biased, but I think the bias was something like 12 minus 12 or 13 CDDs. So it's it's pretty dramatic. So just keep that. Yeah, exactly. Keep that in the back of your mind. But so those are the CFS and the EC forecasts. And then industry number 1, that's Maxar. So you can see Maxar, yep, they're definitely going pretty strong warrant, 65. I did look, it'd be interesting maybe at some point to put the records on here too. But I thanks, Maxar provides us the Dynacast, and I was looking at the Dynacast, and I think the record 5-day CDDs for this period is something like 78. So even though, yeah, exactly. So even though, some of those numbers are pretty high, actually you're right. You can probably see it here if you look. Yeah, there's I think I saw some 70s in there. I don't know what year it was, but I thought, yeah, there it is. What was it? Is it 88 if my eyes, or 86? Or am I looking at 58? No, sorry.
There's 88.
Okay, yeah, it's a 72.
And a 72, yeah.
I thought there was a 78, but yeah. Anyway, so definitely into the 70s. There's a 74.
There's 74 and 06.
Yep. So some pretty high numbers. So, and the only thing, in addition, I'll add to what you see there, and then Dr. Lupo, I can turn it back over to you. Just a couple things there. One, this is sort of just an interesting, I think, just data point. I remember a few weeks ago talking with Dave D'Arcangelo, frequent guest host from industry. And, one of the things we were both saying about a month and a half ago was, this is obviously before we had some of this dramatic heat and stuff, but at that point, we already had some of the rains in Texas and stuff. And one of the assumptions we thought you could make just based on the rain in Texas was, because Texas is such an important energy area, for the country, in terms of in the summer electricity demand and things like that, that, well, maybe at least what this will do is limit the upward potential for June CDDs from a national standpoint. In other words, take off the table, a record hot June month. Well, that assumption that we made was wrong, apparently, because I think the latest numbers I've seen from different vendors, I think including Maxar, is that this June, we obviously only have a couple days left, but I think it's on target to be, from a national standpoint, like the warmest on record, or right up there. So I find that really interesting too, and maybe that says something just about climate change. I don't know, but even in a year where we had significant rains and soils were wet soils in Texas, and not really dramatic heat in Texas, and the we still were able to come up with a June that looks like it will be, or very close to being, a record warm month. So, I guess just a takeaway from me there is some of those old rules of thumb that might have seemed to work 10, 15, 25 years ago, where you could, kind of apply some, at least hedging or whatever. Some of those things may not even work as well either. And actually, the last thing I'll say about that too is, this is more of a feel thing. But when I think of pattern relationships historically, and I guess this works better in the winter when the synoptic patterns are the wavelengths are a little bit larger. But even in the summer, if you told me that there was a really strong ridge across the Northwest United States, I wouldn't think that the continental United States would be in such an exceptionally hot, CDD pattern. I would think, oh, well, maybe there's a trough, cooler temperatures across the Midwest. Maybe it's normal along the East Coast, and yada, yada. And it's just that this pattern is so extreme across areas where, even though the cities are, it's not New York City, it's Seattle, but it's so extreme in those areas, and it's still relatively above normal across enough of the East, like especially the Northeast, East Coast, or above normal CDDs, that even with this pattern, the CDDs from a national perspective are still very impressive. So again, the point there just being, it feels to me some of these rules of thumb that may have worked 15, 20 years ago may not work as well now. And maybe it's because they never worked that well, or it's just sort of short-term bias, or maybe it's a climate change kind of influence to the pattern.
Oh, absolutely. You have to account for these kind of things. And when I look at the statistics out in our area for June, it seems like in the last decade or two that instead of July and August being your primary summer months, we now throw June, July, August as all three having similar types of behavior with the hot, humid conditions. Junes are typically warm out here anyway, but the pattern would be more like spring, where you've got the mobile troughs and ridges, but now it's more stationary with this hot, humid weather that you would expect more in July and August. And that makes sense. I mean, if temperatures are warming globally, then you would expect summer to expand a little bit.
That's right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And again, I do find where I do find, I mean, I guess we all find it really interesting. And I think it's, in my opinion, it's just a little bit more uncertain, is the patterns, right? Are the patterns becoming more predictable or more stable, or this and that? Like overall, right, more areas are warmer, no question, right? And more areas are hotter. But I struggle a little bit with, you know, yeah, again, looking at the pattern that's set up this year so far in June, with the heat being more focused north and west. Is that because of the ocean patterns and different things? How predictable is that? I feel like that's, to me, still a little bit of a struggle. And part of it too is because it's hard also to know how these teleconnections and these relationships are going to be influenced by changing oceans and stuff, right? Like, will the NAO and the PNA and the et cetera, will all these pattern relationships be similar to what they were for the past 20 or 40 years, or will they also evolve? And maybe that correlation with the Southeast will be less, but maybe the correlation with the Northeast or Midwest will be higher.
Right, right, right. No, those are good questions, and I think, and to be honest, I don't have a good answer for that right now. But I think that that question would make a great study to see whether these things are changing in that kind of a fashion. And I think it'd be a great thesis for somebody.
Yeah, on that point, Dr. Not to beat a dead horse here, but I think this is an interesting conversation. And I know one of your areas of expertise here is blocking. You know what I find interesting too, and just an interesting exercise for anyone, but certainly even undergrads and whatnot could do this. Is it's been a while, but I remember I think it's a standard practice, like let's say with the NAO, to kind of just look at if someone's doing a teleconnection relationship, they'll just look at something from the CPC website, which is like a minimum like a 30 or 40-year composite, right? Or maybe even a 50-year composite. And they'll look at that, or when they run their own analysis, they'll look at what's the 50-year relationship between the negative NAO and temperatures in the Midwest or Northeast. But I think it's really interesting when you start to break that down and look at it, not even year by year, but decade by decade. How has that relationship evolved or changed, or how stable has it been across the decades, not just a 50-year period? Like, it may be a minus 0.4 relationship with, I don't know, Chicago or New York, in terms of, I guess, HDDs, let's say, so negative NAO, higher HDDs in the winter, but I found it surprisingly, I don't know, volatile is the right word, but variable at minimum. When you look at those relationships on a decadal, like the 80s relationship versus the 90s versus the 2000s, or year to year, it's not as stable, I think, as maybe many folks think who have not looked at it at a more granular basis.
No, and I think that's correct. I think it's that it's not as stable as 40 and 50 years, that you can look at it to explain decadal things. If you look at the last decade here on the CDDs, you can see the last decade has just been very warm, and there's been a couple of years interspersed here and there where it's been cooler, but in general, it's just been very warm. Whereas a decade or two ago, not so much. So I think you're right about that. It's not stable in terms of a 40 to 50-year period, but you have to look on smaller increments of time.
Right. Thank you.
But any other questions on this week's forecast?
We could have Dr. Lupo, if you want, we could have folks, if they want to kind of share their forecast too, like Michael or Dr. Decker or anyone.
Yeah, I could jump in with my forecasts. It's, as always, just my interpretation of the CPC forecast, which this week it's pretty much divided between a warm north and cold south, with maybe a slight edge to the north with some slightly higher probabilities, although in less populated areas. So I went slightly above normal for my CDD forecasts as a result, and bumped up my sigma a bit with that implied gradient somewhere across the midsection. I could imagine if the cold air expands north a little bit further, or the warm air pushes further south, there could be a big shift in the overall nationwide CDDs. So, yep, there's the map that my forecast is based off. And I didn't go too high with my sigma because the discussion mentioned fairly decent consistency in the various numerical guidance that CPC looks at when they make their forecasts. So just a small shift upward in sigma.
Yeah, Dr. Decker or Stephen, it's the 3 to 4 week outlooks have looked like this for at least a month now.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, it's been pretty steady pattern.
And again, that drives our, oh gosh. I had it up here and I lost it. The CPC analogs that we drew up by looking at the top 10 correlators and then driving that out about, shoot. Well, I showed it earlier and it looked a lot like this. You had that warmth across the north and the
Right.
cool south signal.
You mentioned all the rain, actually both you and Dave, the rain in Missouri, Oklahoma area. And I've noticed in the discussion, CPC continues to focus on the positive soil moisture anomalies down there in the south central US as part of the reason for their below normal forecast as well.
Absolutely. That's one benefit of soil moisture. It'll keep our maxima a little lower. But in terms of human comfort, it'll the humidity will offset those lower maxes.
Yeah, Michael, would you like to share your forecast?
Sure. So I started out my usual formula, blending the EC with the 10-year, which was actually pretty simple this week. There were one CDD off from each other. So started out with 62.7 CDDs there. Raised my forecast by 3.5 CDDs based on the CPC. I had a slightly differing opinion on the effect of the coolness in the south based on a conversation Dave and I had, I think it might have been last week or the week before, where there was a similar setup with a lot of cool in the south and especially in Texas. It just didn't affect the overall forecast that much. And it was still, I think it was still a top 5 warm forecast, even with the cool in Texas. And so that was my thoughts with the CPC, and still looked at the teleconnections, not a very big part of my forecast anymore, but I increased by 0.5 degree based on the teleconnections. Nothing particularly impressive, kind of looks like status quo of the past few months on there. So that's my forecast. Any questions, comments, complaints, concerns?
Yeah, you bring up a good point that you look at this below normal down here, where I would expect that what constitutes below normal, or 1 sigma below normal down here is going to be a lot different from what's up here. And so, yeah, things are below normal here, but sigma is probably a little smaller than up here, where in the north, where sigmas are probably, I wouldn't, I don't have a good feel for how much they are, but I'm guessing they're higher up here because of the storm track. And of course, above normal up here is a much larger sigma. So overall, that's going to mean a little warmer for the whole continent. So yeah, I think your reasoning there is pretty solid.
And I guess I was just going to add one more thing here. Dr. Lupo, do you mind if I share my screen real quick?
Oh, absolutely. Take over on the screen share.
Sure.
Do I have to give that back?
No, you're fine. You're fine. I was just I was looking at your the map that you and Dr. Decker were just talking about, and then here's the this is the June composite off the Maxar Dynacast page. So it's basically historical with the just a couple of forecast days. And it's just, yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me, how much that mimics the CPC, which you guys said has been there for a while. And I guess, again, when I look at that CPC forecast, though, historically, I wouldn't think like, maybe slightly above normal, but in terms of CDDs, but I certainly wouldn't be thinking record. And yet, even this pattern here, despite the fact that the South and Southeast has, I guess, been, kind of on the cool side of normal, barely, I guess, but a little bit. Here's where I'm going to switch now to the rankings. So again, this is June 1st, June 30th, just a couple days left. And you can see from a national basis, we're on target to break the record. And this goes back to 1950, right? So this is what, 70 or so years. But we're on target to get 289 CDDs versus, I guess the previous was 2010 at 2000 and almost 86. So even without the help of a lot of these southern cities, I guess it's just the fact that it's, you have to get, going back to what we're saying, intensity. Intensity matters here. So you could have nailed the pattern like Dave Archangelo and I were talking about a month or month and a half ago. But if you underestimated the intensity of the heat across the north, which just overwhelmed the fact that it was slightly normal or slightly below normal across the south, you still ended up with a record-breaking month. It just really it really blows my mind, something like that. So
Yeah, I don't know, Dave, are you old enough, or Dr. Decker, are you guys old enough that when you were taught to forecast, you were taught not to go, to forecast an extreme, because
Right.
it was hard to
Right, yeah.
trust the models and stuff. And so forecasting something like this, doesn't even enter our minds because of our training. I don't know, Michael, is that how they teach you all these days?
Yeah, I think I don't think I've ever, at least in this regard, from what I recall, that I was ever taught to forecast an extreme.
Right.
But yeah, I mean that's a in the age of climate change, and especially in certain areas, certain seasons, certain regions, it's yeah. I mean it's an interesting question, right? Because certainly if we just look at maybe records is still a little bit extreme, but if we pull up the June August numbers here, I mean let's look at how many years have been near the top, right? 2016, 11, 2020, which last year, 2010, 2018, 2012, 2000. I mean, how many times
Right.
was the record broken in the last 15 years or so? Or if not broken, it's a new high from what we had seen previously before the last 10 or 15 years. So, and that's just United States, right? That's let alone maybe more high latitude areas where, my understanding is the climate's warming even at a greater rate. So maybe in Canada and Russia and places like that, they may even see more, more extreme, more extremes on a regular basis, quote unquote, than us.
Yep, you move that normal distribution up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
remember. I mean, 2000 in particular. Yeah, these 3 years, 2010, 11, 12. I remember those back in the industry because you can see 2010 there, 11 and 12, and all three of those at the time were records. Right? You could say there's nothing higher than 2010, 11, and 12. And we had those 3 years consecutive. So
Right.
I remember after 2012, everyone was like, was starting to think that, like, is every summer going to be, like a record or near record in the continental United States? And I think finally 13 and 14, it did break a little bit, one of those years, and it might have been 14 was kind of cool in particular, or at least relatively cool. But I don't know. We'll see. We're certainly off to a good start, or hot start anyway, this summer.
That we are, and I think I think as we were talking about in May, many of us were forecasting that warm summer. So
Yeah, yeah. So I think well, this was great. Well, thank you for I think we're just about out of time. I want to be sensitive to everyone's time. So, thank you so much, Dr. Lupo, for joining us and leading today's discussion. And look forward to, I guess, having you back, I think in July at some point. Is that right?
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah, this
We'll do it again.
all right.
We
All
can,
right, excellent.
we
All right,
can
well-
compare to this and see how things have moved along.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the, I guess there's at least two big questions that come to mind. Can we maintain this kind of level of, from a continental United States, this near record or record breaking level into July and August? And two, the patterns, right? Will the patterns remain similar with the focus more north and west, or will we see some changes to that in July and August? So to be continued, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Lupo. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks,
you're
guys.
welcome. You all have a great weekend.
All right.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.